Great. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the third and final webinar of our Collegiate Impaired Road Use Prevention webinar series. My name is Elizabeth Branham, and I'm a traffic safety specialist with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery at Ohio State University. This webinar series has been conducted in collaboration with Prevention Action Alliance and the Higher Ed Center. Thank you to our partners at PAA for their support of this webinar series and to our funder, the Ohio Traffic Safety Office, for prioritizing the college population with prevention initiatives. Today's webinar, Models for Improvement, Engaging Community and Industry Partners in Impaired Driving Prevention, will focus on identifying key partners to involve in this work and discuss a successful model to encourage young adults to find a safe ride home from bars and restaurants in Columbus. Our speakers today will include Cindy Clowner, the Managing Director of the Higher Ed Center, as well as Don Nixon and Rachel Furman from Creative Spot Marketing Agency. I will now turn it over to you, Cindy.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you to Juliana and our colleagues at Prevention Action Alliance for hosting us today. We're thrilled to be here. So we're glad to have such a great group. We have this is the third and final session of a series around impaired road use, and perhaps you have joined us in the past and have heard about the issue and why it is something that the Higher Education Center has been prioritizing, or this may be your first session. And so we're going to start with a little bit of foundation setting to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we'll dive into partnerships, because this work is partnerships are so critical to the success of this work. And so we'll spend time today talking about strategies for partners and developing partnerships, and then also explore who might be good partners for around this work. And we're focusing today on partners within the community. We've spent some time talking about other partners on campus, but we can, so we're looking at it from that lens of who within the community could we be engaging with? If you are already in the community, which it looks like a lot of the folks that are joining us are, we're happy to engage in additional conversations around how you can bring your local campuses to the table if they're the ones that are missing. So to get started, let's just do a little bit of recapping. So impaired driving is the leading cause of alcohol-related death among college students, and this has been the case for decades now. And that really is the impetus of why the Higher Education Center has taken the mantle on the issue of impaired road use. We've also seen changes in the environment, of course, over the last decade with the increase in cannabis use among our population, as well as more states have legalized, Ohio, of course, being one of those, legalizing for adult cannabis use. And with that, we've seen an increase in the number of people driving after using cannabis. In 2022, the highest percentage of impaired drivers were the 21 to 24-year-old age group. And so that is part of our population in the higher ed space. And so, one of the things that is challenging is reaching that age group. And we know that that age group typically falls into one of three buckets, right? Our 21 to 24-year-olds are either enrolled in higher ed, they may be enlisted within the military, or they have joined the workforce. And so higher ed is, of course, our space. It's also an opportunity and a place where it is easier to reach those that population. So that's another reason why our center has been working on this issue. When we look at college students in particular, one of the most current data sources that we have is the National Collegiate Health Assessment, which comes from the American College Health Association. And this is an assessment that campuses can opt into taking. And their reference data from the spring of 2024 indicated that 12.8% of college students reported driving after having any alcohol in the last 30 days. And that would be of students who reported using alcohol and driving within the last 30 days. And then when we look at cannabis, nearly 30% of college students reported driving within 6 hours of using cannabis in the last 30 days, if they also reported driving during that time. And so that's 30% of students reporting using cannabis too. So that's a pretty big percentage of folks that are using a substance and then driving afterwards. So there's a lot of opportunity for education and intervention. However, when we talk to campuses about this, we hear we oftentimes hear a few arguments and some barriers to addressing the impaired road use issue. The most common one is, well, our students don't drive. And so oftentimes we think about residential students. Cars on campus might be limited. Maybe only upperclassmen can have cars. But what happens when students move off campus? Or what about your commuter students? And so, if you were with us in February for our webinar, Liz, Paige, and Dr. Jim Lang presented on some of the panel data that we've collected in Ohio. And that tells us that, yes, our college enrolled students are driving. And so that's a population that we should be thinking about, right? Because they are getting behind a wheel and they're driving. The other thing that we hear a lot is, well, it's not a problem here. And when we think about what it's not a problem here may mean, it usually means a few things. I mean, it could mean that they have data that shows that there's really just a very small number of students that might be engaging in this behavior. And so it truly might not be a problem that rises to the need to address it at a large scale. However, what it likely means is we don't actually know if it's a problem here because we're not collecting any data, or the data that we're collecting is really limited in scope. And so we don't understand the behaviors around transportation as it relates to consuming alcohol and other substances, and students driving or using micro transportation methods like scooters, bicycles, and skateboards. And again, in February, our team shared about a measure that was developed in partnership with key stakeholders from across the country, federal government folks, national organizations, researchers were all a part of this measure that has been developed and tested and was used as part of this pilot. And if you weren't a part of that and are interested in learning more, send Liz a note in the chat and she'll be sure to share that recording of the February webinar with you. So that's one thing we hear. We aren't collecting data on this. The other thing is, well, we're not seeing these behaviors on campus, right? It's not a problem here because we're not seeing it. And that also could be true, right? Impaired driving rarely happens on campus proper. It's usually happening in the community outside of campus. Depending on the relationship between community law enforcement and the campus, impaired road use incidents that result in a citation or crash might not be reported to campus, right? So if law enforcement in the campus community are not asking if a person is a student, that information may never go back to campus. But what we do know is that for folks who are engaging in this behavior, they rarely are doing it as a one-off behavior. Right. So the data is pretty clear that folks, when they engage in this behavior, they're doing it repeatedly. There was some data from the CDC about 15 years ago that said that they identified that on average a drunk driver will drive 80 times under the influence before their first arrest. And unfortunately, we don't have any updated data to know if that is true or not still. But the idea that folks are engaging in this behavior repeatedly and oftentimes multiple times before they experience a negative consequence, being pulled over, experiencing a crash or an injury related to their impaired road use. And so it's hard to see sometimes that issue. And so that's why engaging partners around this is so important. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of pivot to what it takes to develop partnerships, because that work is hard. It sounds easy. Well, let's develop a partnership. Let's work together. And the spirit of that might be fairly simple. But anyone who has done collaborative work knows that it is a lot harder than it sounds. And so we're going to start by talking about tips for how to engage potential partners. And then we'll shift into who those potential partners might be. So first tip, as we're working on developing partnerships, and these tips really are not necessarily specific to impaired road use. They're strategies that you can be using in your daily work to prevent alcohol and drug misuse and its associated harms. And so the first tip is to do your research. It's really important not to make a partnership ask blindly. Right. So there's some things that we should know about an entity before we reach out to them, and to help us determine whether or not they would be a good partner in the work that we're doing. So here's some questions that we can ask ourselves and hopefully have answers to before we actually engage a potential partner. One of those is really understanding what their mission is and what their priorities are, and then how your issue of focus aligns with that. Right. So for an entity to want to spend time and resources and capacity on this issue, there has to be some kind of mutual benefit and alignment within their mission. And spending some time on their website, getting a better sense of who they are as an organization and what their priorities are, is an important first step to determining whether or not an organization is a good partner for you in this work. Um, it could be that you have a history of partnering with this organization. And if that's the case, what has that relationship been like? Hopefully, it's been a positive, fruitful relationship that you can continue building on. But it's also possible that there had been a previous relationship that maybe soured in some way. And understanding that history is a really important step to know how to approach and ask for a future partnership. Perhaps one of the most critical questions to ask, though, is what is in it for them? So if you're approaching a potential partner, there's some kind of incentive or value to you for having them at the table. But being able to articulate why it is important for them to be at the table is really important. I need to know why as a agency director, I want to know why I should allocate staff time and resources, and and provide access to my network um, for this issue. And so, being able to articulate what the benefit is to my organization is really important, because not everyone will be able to connect those dots, right? Some people will, but some people need help connecting the dots. So be prepared to do that. But we should also think about kind of more pragmatic questions too, and be ready to answer those as well. So as we're thinking about reaching out to an organization, who is the most appropriate contact at that organization? You know, in the context of a university, one of the things we hear a lot from community folks is, well, I sent an email to the president, or I sent an email to the athletic director. And oftentimes, those are not the people where you'll actually be able to engage and develop a partnership through, right? So, taking a look at an organizational chart that may exist on a organization's website to understand who the most appropriate contact is, um, can can help save some steps and some time. In the same token, finding out who the most appropriate person is to make the contact can go a long way as well. So at the Higher Ed Center, when we reach out to other folks for partnerships, if we have someone within our network or within our team that already has an existing relationship or connection to that organization, then we usually have that person make the initial ask, or handoff. And so they might not be the person who is overseeing this part of the work, but they can make that connection, because having that relationship can help you move further and faster when it comes to developing a partnership. So if there's a way to make a warm handoff, whether that be someone within your organization or someone who's in your network that may be doing work with that organization already, but they're not technically within your staff, they could also reach out to that person and make a connection for you. Think about the best times to reach out to folks. Is this organization one that has a calendar where they have some really busy times? They have a huge event coming up, right? If they have a huge event coming up, reaching out to them a couple of days before that big event probably isn't the best time. If you're thinking about reaching out to universities or schools, reaching out in July might not be the best time, right? So if there's no students, or if their staff has limited hours in the summer, or at another time of year, it might not be the best time to reach out. So think about, for that organization and for your organization, what is the best time to reach out? Where would it be convenient to connect? Certainly, we've all, I think, done a great job of leveraging the resources we have when it comes to meeting virtually, but there still is certainly value to meeting in person. So identifying where does it make sense to connect, and where would be convenient for your partner. And also, why now? Why is now the time to be reaching out? And hopefully now is the time because you don't actually have an ask of them yet. Um, because we think about, if your car broke down and you need a ride somewhere. You can call a friend and ask them for a ride, or you can reach out to a stranger walking down the street and ask them for a ride. You may have a very kind hearted stranger who's willing to give you that ride, but you're much more likely to get what you need from by asking your friend. And the same is true in this kind of relationship development, right? So you're more likely to get a yes from someone that you have built a relationship with than someone that you don't know. And so taking the time to build the relationship before you need to ask them for a partnership or a collaborative opportunity will increase your likelihood of being successful when you do need to make that ask. So, what are some things you can do when you're making that first connection? One, send an email and ask for a brief introductory meeting, no more than 30 minutes. Virtual is a great way to go here because people can slide those meetings in relatively quickly. Focus that on learning about them and the work that they're doing and identifying potential synergies between your work. So rather than the focus being on what you can do or what you are doing, you want to learn more about what they are doing. And then offer windows of availability looking out at least 2 weeks. Lots of people have schedules that fill up very quickly. And so, if you get an email asking for an hour of your time and they want it next week, that's not very realistic for a lot of folks. And so looking out at least 2 weeks and then offering those times. So I can tell you that that's um, one of the things that I've started doing, because we can do this like back and forth thing of, let me know when you're available. Yes, I'd love to meet. Tell me when you're available. Just start by telling people when you're available. And they'll tell you if they're not available during those times and we need to rework it, right? But take out some of that middle stuff by just telling people what times work for you, looking out at least 2 weeks. Um, when you have those meetings, learn about their work in good faith and consider what value your organization can bring to theirs. And then if that meeting goes well, ask to continue the conversation over coffee if feasible. And so then you can meet in person and continue that conversation. Staying connected is an important part of that as well, because we don't build relationships by having one meeting with a person and then not talking to them again until we need something. Right. So staying connected with those folks. Send a follow-up email, thanking them for their time. And if you did discuss any potential next steps, maybe that conversation was really fruitful and it's very clear where there are synergies and opportunities to partner. And you walked away with some things that you would like to do moving forward. That's awesome. If that is the case, outline those next steps so that it's clear, as well as who's going to do what piece. Also, ask to join their listserv. So if you're not already getting emails about the work that their organization is doing, ask to get connected with that so that you can stay on top of those things. And then use that as an opportunity to stay connected with them. Respond occasionally to some of those communications that are coming in about their work. So if you see an event coming in that this looks great, do you mind if I share it with my colleagues? Good luck on the work that you're doing. I'm looking forward to joining you at your upcoming meeting. So getting engaged in their work is another thing that you can do to help bolster those relationships. Certainly share opportunities that may align with their work. So here at the center, we see lots of things coming in terms of training opportunities, funding opportunities. And so we'll share those off with other people within our network who it aligns with the things that they do, but it may not be coming from folks that are typically within their circle, right? So we send those off to them. So share opportunities that might align, and then plan to reach out every few months to set up a follow-up meeting. Especially, this is dependent on, where you see that potential partnership going. If you see them being a close partner, then certainly continue engaging them regularly, and setting up those follow-up meetings to continue staying abreast of what is their priorities and the things that they're working on and how you can collaborate is valuable. Provide meaningful roles for folks. And this is, once we've developed that partnership. So if you put in all of this work and now you have an opportunity to collaborate on something. And once we do that, ensure that there's meaningful roles for those that are at the table and are a part of those partnerships, and really avoid tokenizing, having a specific person representing a group or an entity that's at the table just to represent those folks. And so we can provide meaningful roles to our partners by collaborating with them from the very beginning to develop a shared vision. And this is, again, another reason why we want to have those relationships prior to having an ask, is so that by having a shared vision and collaborating on that shared vision, there's much more buy in to the work that's happening. We're more likely to have a successful collaboration from that. Um, Identifying clear roles and responsibilities for each entity. Communication is can be the downfall of all relationships, business ones as well. So making sure that we're clearly communicating who is doing what piece, who is responsible for what, and that it's clear across all of our partners is important. And then certainly be open to their feedback and their perspective. We have them at the table because they bring a unique lens, right? They're representing perhaps a different population. They're representing a different aspect or context to the work. And we want them there because of that expertise that they're bringing. So be open to the feedback that they share with you. And finally, when it comes to strategies for partnerships, is keeping a record. So document those relationships. Keep a file that includes all the important information about the organization, who your contacts are, how you contact them, what strategies worked and didn't work. Maintain a written history of your partnership. That is helpful as you're writing grants. If you're collaborating with folks, you're going to be asked to document what that relationship looks like and who those partners are. So maintain a written history that then you can just copy and paste into your grant proposal or make some tweaks when it's time for that. Consider an MOU for partners that you're working with regularly. That helps define the relationship, formalizes the relationship so that there is documentation of what each partner brings to the table. And certainly utilize your local media to promote that partnership and its successes. Let people know about the great work that you're doing together. But this documentation part is so important, and it's one of the pieces that gets missed the most. And then we have to start over with partnerships because people turn over. They take different jobs, they win the lottery, they go different places, and then we lose that historical knowledge of the partnership. So documenting is so important. So now we know how to develop partnerships. Who are some of those partners that we should look at? Let's start with some state level partners. And these partners are more folks that can provide expertise and resources for you. Not just necessarily funding resources, but they may have access to other types of resources that you may find valuable. So we're here today through some generous funding from the Ohio Traffic Safety Office, which is an office under the Department of Public Safety here in Ohio. And their priority areas are really focused around safe driving. You see impaired driving as one of those, but they have other priority areas as well. And so they fund a number of initiatives. They fund law enforcement folks. They have a number of grant initiatives to help keep road users safe. And so there's places where you can tap into some of the resources that they have designed and developed. And one of those is through Safe Communities Coalition. So here's a map of Ohio. The purple counties are counties that currently have funding for a Safe Communities Coalition. And those coalitions have kind of designated priorities that they're focused on, but impaired road use may be one of them. And so take a look at what the county that you're in, if you're in Ohio, and identify if you have a Safe Communities Coalition. If so, Liz has dropped in the chat a link that takes you to the contact information for those safe communities folks. And so they are convening people to address these issues, and they are already working on this, right? They've already convened other stakeholders who think it is important. And so engaging them in this work is important and super valuable to you. I do just want to put a quick plug in for the Ohio Traffic Safety Office's upcoming summit on May 19th and 20th at the Ohio Union. It is free. It is an excellent conference. This will be their second year doing it. I was able to attend last year. We're looking forward to being there again this year. They really put on a really strong event. And so if you are in the area, please plan to attend, and Liz will drop in the registration link so that you can join. Another state level resource is the Ohio State Highway Patrol, because they are the ones that house all of our state level traffic data. And they have done an excellent job of making this data available and usable for folks. So if you are working on this issue and you need to better understand your local data, either at a state level or at a county level, you can visit the OSHP website. And I think Liz dropped the dashboard link in the chat, and take a look at their data. So these are just screen grabs of the OVI dashboard. This is kind of the beginning, but then you can dive deeper. Right now we see it is focused on statewide data, but that drop down at the top right hand corner lets you pick by county. You can see where crashes are happening, the severity of the crashes. We can look at crashes and arrests over time, over the past year, as well as from year to date. We can also look at more broadly at other statistics. So we focused on the OVI dashboard because that's the topic that we're centering today, but they have all of the data that is coming in by law enforcement entities around crashes and arrests and citations. And you can take a look at that data through their dashboard. If you are joining us outside of Ohio, reach out to your local highway safety office to identify what kind of data they have. They have data. It may not be as accessible as this, but they certainly are collecting data as part of receiving federal funding. Okay, let's look at some local level partners. Who in our community can we reach out to? And one of those folks is our local prevention agency and coalition. Here in Ohio, every county has an entity responsible for prevention services. Those are often housed within the county. However, there are sometimes larger agencies serving multiple counties. And so knowing who your prevention agency is certainly an important asset, because they have staff that are trained in best practices on alcohol and other drug prevention and risk reduction. However, that intersection with traffic safety may not be a priority for them. And so there's a lot of really great opportunity to come together with prevention agencies, or if you have a coalition coalition within your community as well, which is a group of folks focused on a specific AOD issue. They are a really great ally in this work. They likely already know key players in this space. They may have access to larger networks and resources. And so we encourage you to engage with them. So, some tips for engaging with your community prevention agency is certainly know who they are and their priorities. Few prevention agencies in the state of Ohio stand alone as a prevention agency. They're most often housed within mental health agencies. Your local ADAM board, ADIS board, your local mental health and addiction services board, whatever it is known as, um, will be able to point you in the direction of the prevention agency for your county, and would likely also be aware of a coalition that exists. So if you are not sure who those people are, I encourage you to reach out to them as a first step. Focus on mutual goals. So I came from community prevention background, and as I've worked in the traffic safety space, I see a lot of parallels in the work that we're doing, but we do them oftentimes in different ways with different language. And so identifying some of those mutual goals is important. They might not be thinking about impaired road use as a priority area. Their focus may be on things like underage drinking or cannabis use. However, by addressing underage drinking and cannabis use, we also address impaired road use. So there's overlap there. So identify where that overlap is. Showing up for their work, attending coalition meetings and community events, certainly inviting them to yours is a value. Campuses, if you are collecting data, you'll see this is a common thread through a lot of these, is sharing the data that's of mutual interest to these entities so that they are aware of the data that you've collected. And you may have access to resources that they do not have access to or that would have value to them. And again, these are not necessarily monetary resources, it could be space. Maybe you have access to a meeting room that you can host a coalition meeting. Perhaps it is access to some graphic design. It is access to connecting with researchers or evaluators on your campus that can help them evaluate their programming. So think about, again, not just how they can help you, but how you can help them. Looking at law enforcement, which is certainly a critical partner in this work because we know that one of the most effective strategies for reducing impaired road use is having high visibility enforcement or the perception of high visibility enforcement. So those who believe that there is a high risk of getting caught driving impaired are less likely to do it. So engaging law enforcement is really a critical partner. Understanding the existing relationship between your campus law enforcement and public safety office and your municipality police department is probably the first step in that. Most often, campuses have some kind of agreement, and so understanding what that agreement is and how they collaborate is important, working through your campus law enforcement or public safety office to engage law enforcement initially uh, is a good first step as well. They may have some funding. So they may be folks that are getting some of that OSSO dollars to address impaired road use, and you may be able to help support them in initiatives that they already have planned. We want to make sure that law enforcement are at the table so that they can provide their lens to the work that is happening. Again, they may find value in the data that you have collected around this issue. And uh, if they are already doing impaired road use enforcement initiatives or education initiatives, you can help promote the work that they are already doing as well. So finding opportunities for cross collaboration with law enforcement is really important. Local government is also another partner that we can reach out to. And those of us who come from a prevention space know that environmental prevention strategies, strategies that address the environment in which a person makes decisions around alcohol and substance use, are some of the most effective. So those are things like policy, enforcement, reducing access to substances, addressing the physical environment and infrastructure. Those are all effective strategies to reducing high risk alcohol use, and those are all strategies that local government hold a critical key to being successful in implementing, right? So, in addition to overseeing local law enforcement, our local government can help set local policies. They can help shape messaging around the issue. They can leverage their channels to help expand reach. They may have access to grant resources that aren't accessible in any other venue. And they can help institutionalize change. And so they really are an important partner in this work. And so if you are coming from a campus, it's really important to be engaging your government relations office before you reach out directly to your local government. So there is already an established relationship between your campus and the town government. We talk about town gown relationships. If you are a campus person, that might be something that you are familiar with, a term you're familiar with. When we talk about town gown, town referring to the community in which a campus resides, and gown referring to the actual campus itself. And so there are certainly lots of challenges that can come up between the town and the gown. And so there is definitely a relationship there. So make sure that you're working through your government relation office before directly reaching out to your local government. But once you have the go ahead to engage, be sure to discuss this issue within the context of their priorities, right? So why is it that impaired road use is something that should be important to them? How does it fit within the priorities of the government? Think about how your gown data, your campus data, ties to their town concerns. What are the things that they're seeing? What are the concerns that they have and that they're hearing about from their constituents and their residents? And how does that data, how can that data then inform the work that can be done? Bring students to the table. And again, this is true across all of these, but students are powerful. And having students speak at city council meetings can help bring awareness. They oftentimes can make things happen much more quickly than those of us that are staff or faculty on a campus. So leverage that power of the student voice. And you know, local governments spend a lot of time hearing complaints and problems and why people aren't happy. And so, while understanding what the problem is that you want to solve is important, bringing solutions to the table is really valuable to be able to move that work forward. Thinking about the healthcare sector, that's another opportunity for partnership and an important one for college students because college students frequently rank healthcare professionals as some of the most trustworthy sources of information. So there's a real opportunity for early intervention there. And so this can include supporting both physical and mental health, how we engage with ERs and hospitals, urgent cares, pharmacies, primary care docs, even thinking about public health departments within this realm as well. And so, uh, if we want to engage with the healthcare sector, start with providers that have an existing relationship with your institution. So, if you are already have a formal contract with an entity, maybe they are providing your health clinic services or they're providing counseling services on campus, start there. If you have a more informal relationship because they're a common referral source for students, starting at a place with providers who are engaging with your students and understand the unique needs of them and how to engage with them in an effective way is a good first start. Find a champion in the healthcare space. This is again can be true across all of these partners, but what I've learned over the years is doctors are much more likely to listen to other doctors when it comes to these things. And so, if you can find someone who is in the healthcare space working in that role that can help champion the work that you're doing to help advocate, you may be more effective in moving the needle in that partnership. Um, if you have turnkey resources that can be posted places in waiting rooms and exam rooms that they can just put up someplace, that can be really valuable. But there's likely opportunity for training and education here because historically the healthcare sector is vastly undertrained when it comes to understanding substance misuse, addiction, and we know that. A number of folks who are engaging in impaired driving behaviors have a substance use disorder. And so partnering with a CME provider, so that's the folks who provide continuing education to doctors to offer training on this issue can help increase the knowledge of your healthcare providers so that they are better equipped to have those conversations with students. And then the last sector that I want to talk about is the business sector. And this is an important sector, especially as we think about those that have are points of access for alcohol. Those who are points of sale or points of consumption, right? So they have an opportunity to promote responsible service. They also have an opportunity to provide cues to folks, which research shows by providing a cue, in asking the question, who is your designated driver? A group is more likely to, one, identify a designated driver who will then have a lower blood alcohol content level than the rest of the group, which is certainly important when we're talking about reducing impaired road use. So, how do we want to engage the business sector? Those of you who are in prevention, this is a sector that oftentimes people struggle with the most in how to engage them. Starting with your community relations office, they might be able to make warm handoffs to key business and government partners. So they're a good person to reach out to. Alcohol outlets are also in the business of selling alcohol. And so focusing the ask on a mutual goal or concern is really important here. So if the message that we are sending is that if we have just a general drink less message, that might not be seen favorably by our business partners who sell alcohol. However, there's mutual interest in reducing impaired road use, right? It's a liability for alcohol serving establishments. If they overserve and a person drives after drinking at their establishment, there is a legal liability there. So that is a mutual interest. So focusing our messaging and the interventions that we want to do on with businesses on something that is a mutual goal or concern is really critical. And then one of the things that we also encourage is developing working relationships with business associations. You have hundreds of businesses in your community. It isn't realistic to engage all of them one on one. So, working with your Chamber of Commerce or your local business improvement district allows you to reach lots of businesses quickly. It brings credibility to the work you're doing because, again, you don't have that relationship with them. It's not realistic for you to develop a relationship with all of these businesses. However, they do. They have the relationship. And so we don't have to start from ground zero if we can develop the relationship with the associations who are working with these businesses. And then really understand the barriers that businesses may face when it comes to accomplishing this ask, because there's a lot of challenges to doing some of the work that we would like to see from the business sector. And so really understanding that can help you be more successful. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and toss it over to my colleagues, Rachel and Dawn, to share a little bit more about how they've been able to do this work in Columbus.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And we're really excited to talk about this kind of based on what Cindy's last group that she talked about, the businesses. We have a really exciting marketing campaign that we did just towards the end of last year to kind of be a really good example of how you can put this into action. So an overview of the campaign is based on like what Cindy was saying with finding those common goals and finding that organization, maybe like a business district improvement agency that would have those contacts for businesses that would be helpful. We identified the short north area of Columbus as a really good target for this campaign. If you're not familiar with the Columbus area, the short north district is a really popular shopping and entertainment district. Lots of bars, lots of restaurants, some entertainment areas, lots of shopping opportunities. And it does have a close proximity to OSU's campus. And so a lot of college students and young adults will go there. And they also every now and then will have some events on the weekends or during some weeknights or around holidays that bring in extra foot traffic. The Short North Alliance is a nonprofit organization that works with property and business owners in that area, and they also work to connect with them with some potential community partners. And so after we identified the Short North Alliance as as a good organization to partner with, we'd set up several introductory calls, just like Cindy was saying, to start to build that relationship. We start with introducing Rad Ohio, who we are and what our mission is, and learn more about them as well. You know, like exactly what Cindy was saying. What are the mutual benefits and synergies that we can work on together? And so after we all kind of fairly well knew each other and we heard more about what they're doing, what they have on the calendar, we identified these events in September and December. The December one, for example, was called the Holiday Hops, where some shopping stores would stay open later. They would have extra entertainment there. And we identified these as potential events where our target audience will be. And so we talked to the Short North Alliance about how we could work together to get our message in front of these young adults. And we talked to them about maybe creating some signage that we can display in the bars and restaurants during these high traffic weekends for the purpose of reminding the people visiting to get home safely. And again, like Cindy mentioned, we wanted to get that message in front of them at the point of consumption. And whenever we are approaching a marketing campaign, we have this basic framework that we do to stay focused and make sure our execution is effective. We start with the objective. What do we want to achieve with this campaign? Then we move into a strategy. How do we want to achieve that objective? And then we move into the execution to make sure it gets done. So for this campaign, our objective was to decrease students driving home impaired from the Short North area specifically. Our strategy was just to remind them to choose a safe way to get home. And we would execute that by creating eye-catching materials and distribute them to interested bars and restaurants in the Short North where our message could be shared at that point of consumption. Our target audience for this campaign was college students and young adults aged 21 to 24. And geographically, we were focusing specifically on bars and restaurants in close proximity to the university, places where students are likely to gather to eat and socialize, and etc. And so geographically, the Short North was a really appealing area for that. So how we approached this, we talked to our partner, the Short North Alliance, and we agreed on a plan where they would reach out via email to their contacts of bars and restaurants. And because they have been around for a long time, they know the bars and restaurants, they know all the businesses in that area. That was a long list of contacts that we didn't have to gather ourselves. They already had that. And so we provided him with some information about Rad Ohio, what our mission is, you know, what's our tone, what are we trying to achieve? And in this email, he used the information that we provided to introduce Rad Ohio to all of these businesses and ask if they would be interested in displaying our messaging in their establishments. And if they were interested, they were to respond to him. And then since they already had that established relationships, and then he would relay that information to us, and we would provide what the businesses needed to do this. We found this approach worked really well because, as I mentioned, the Short North Alliance already had all of this information. That saved us so much time and so many steps than us trying to gather all of that information ourselves one by one. And one of the key benefits to this approach is we got in direct contact with decision makers. A lot of times, if you are cold calling or starting from scratch, you will reach out to, say, a general info email. And then that might lead you to some other person, and then they have to get in contact with a manager who has to get in contact with the owner. We did not have to worry about any of that. Because this organization, because the Short North Alliance works with the businesses directly, we got to get in front of the decision makers, the people who decide what is going to be, you know, shown and displayed in my restaurant right away. So as a result of this work, we ended up printing over 200 posters and table tents between the two different events in September and December, And we had them distributed to the businesses that expressed enthusiasm and helping. And so that was the really nice thing is our messaging is just make sure you get home safe. And our goal is to decrease impaired driving. And that is a common goal with a lot of bars and restaurants in the area. They don't want their visitors. They don't want the people going to their establishments to drive impaired either. And so it really was a mutually beneficial thing. And so we had 14 total businesses express interest and agree to display our content in their establishments. These are some examples of the type of things that we provided to those businesses and bars and restaurants for them to display. And I want to start real quick with mentioning we chose posters and table tents because that's very common forms of marketing and messaging that you'll see in bars and restaurants. And display space can be really limited in these areas. And so we wanted to make sure that we had formats that would take up minimal space and fit easily within existing marketing and decor that they might already have. Plus, these can be placed in really high traffic areas with captive audiences like restrooms, at tables where they're sitting and eating, at bar tops. So that's why we chose to focus in on these two formats. And when we were creating the artwork, we had a few things that we wanted to keep in mind to make sure it would be most effective. We chose a colorful palette, not only because, as you can see from the presentation itself, that is the Rad Ohio branding. We like a lot of color, but it also kind of portrays a sense of fun, which plays well into our also goal of having a non-judgmental tone. You know, we are not trying to make people feel bad about their behavior. We want just to remind them to get home safe. That's our main goal. We are not judging, we're not condemning, we are reminding you to get home safe. We don't want them to drive impaired. We use clear language about what we want them to know. So we clearly say, if you have a plan to get home safely, stick to it. You know, grab a ride share, use your sober ride home. We give them exact ideas about what to do, and we are clear about what we're asking them. We also use this opportunity to connect them directly to our social media. So you'll see each of these artwork has a QR code where if they scan it, it takes them directly to our social media so they can start following us. So this campaign was really, really great at getting this messaging a reminder to get home safely at point of consumption. But one of the things we also want to do with the Rad Ohio program in general is to meet them at the point of decision before they leave and remind them to make a plan to get home. So we also used this campaign to connect them to our social media. So if they follow us, that increases the likelihood that they will see a make a plan now message before they even leave. You can also use these for, different things. You can use a QR code to scan to a website or a landing page. I know there have been some marketing campaigns where we've created online surveys if you want to gather some information about who you're talking to and maybe what their perceptions are about alcohol or cannabis use. So there's different things that you can do. And again, that would go back to what are your objectives for the campaign? And then I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to talk about how you might implement this yourself.
Thanks, Rachel. Really, and Cindy has covered some of this already, but in terms of executing it on your end to try to keep it as efficient and simple as possible, as Rachel also discusses, it's almost impossible to contact each one of these organizations directly, whether it be a bar or a restaurant, at the right time, at the right place, and hoping to talk to the right person. It can really be almost a mountain that you don't really want to try to climb. So looking for opportunities and what associations are available near your campuses. Most campus bar and restaurant areas have some sort of an association that they're attached to. It could be an independent association. It could be a small chamber of commerce almost that you might be directed to or find. There could be special districts in your area that are improvement districts or areas where people are working together with business owners or collaborating with business owners to increase different points of interest in the area or work on, various different aspects so they work together. So finding that connection that has the connections that can help you is really, really important. Um, and then once established, reach out and find out who that point of person is within that association. So sometimes you can find this information on websites. Sometimes you might have to pick up the phone and make a phone call. It just depends on how the association is structured. And I think that in our experience, you'll find that some are very thorough and polished, and others, maybe aren't quite as sophisticated. So you kind of have to gauge, the level of sophistication with each organization, and then figure out the best plan. Again, some of them will have individual contacts that you could maybe reach out to and email. Others may have more of a general email address, but oftentimes it's just trying to figure out who that point of contact is within that association or organization that you are trying to reach. Um, Once you do figure that out, we suggest, sending an introductory email to explain, what you are looking for and how you would like to start a conversation. We would advise that you keep this fairly simple and introductory. Don't put a lot of information in the email. Don't overwhelm them. And then we actually have created some templates for all of you to use if you're interested as a starting point for these email introductions, just to give you some based on best practices and things that have worked for us. Once you've done the introduction, then you have the opportunity to discuss the potential opportunity and creating that partnership. And ideally, you would want to do an introductory call of some kind to introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about your organization, your campus affiliation, and what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And so just really kind of nurturing the relationship. Start simple, and then work to engage someone. Again, as Cindy said, oftentimes a quick Zoom conversation is easy, it's quick, anybody can join it. It's fantastic for starting that relationship and helping them understand what it is you're trying to accomplish and decrease impaired driving. And then we also have created within the link that you'll receive in this presentation all of the materials that you saw that Rachel presented. In addition to the email templates that I just referenced, you will have all of the templates and any of that information you're free to use as an example for your organization. And so we've tried to make this as turnkey as possible for everybody to take advantage of. We've spent a lot of time and research working on these materials and have had some success with them. So with that, I will turn it back over to Cindy.
Okay. Well,
Awesome. Thank you, Don. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. We will follow up with the presentation slides and those links that Don and Rachel shared and created with all those materials for you afterwards as well. We also have a free learning collaborative today at the Higher Ed Center starting at 12:30 p.m. We would love to see you there if you're able. I will put the link in the chat for anyone who is interested. And if you have any further questions or um, need any additional information about this work, feel free to reach out. Our emails are available on our website. Thank you so much.